Several horses killed in devastating bonfire at historic Saratoga racing track in New York. A devastating early morning fire at a horse racing facility in Saratoga Springs, New York, claimed the life of at least 17 horses or more, sending shockwaves through one of America's most iconic racing community. Now let's go beyond the surface and reveal every layer of this story on our AI
So
podcast.
imagine an entire city block just erupting in flames at like 2:30 in the morning.
Oh man, that's a terrifying image.
Right. But instead of sleeping people inside those buildings, this block is filled with, hundreds of highly sensitive, incredibly valuable athletes.
Yeah, which is exactly the terrifying reality that recently hit the Saratoga Casino Hotel harness racing track.
Exactly. And when you picture a horse track, you probably picture, I don't know, the grandstands, the betting windows, people in those fancy hats drinking cocktails, right?
Yeah, totally. The glamorous side.
Right. But today's deep dive takes us, well, far away from all those cameras and the crowds. We are taking our sources and going straight into the backstretch.
Yeah, and the backstretch is really the part of the racing world that the public, they rarely see it. I mean, it's basically a completely self-contained village.
It's like a city within a city almost.
Exactly. You have grooms who practically live there, veterinarians, farriers, and just hundreds of horses stabled in these long rows of barns. Yeah, and it operates on its own unique clock, usually springing to life way before sunrise.
Right. And our mission today for you, our listener, is to, well, unpack a profoundly devastating event that struck the absolute heart of that village.
Yeah.
We're looking at the reports from the Saratoga Backstretch Inferno. We want to look past the headlines to understand the mechanics of this disaster.
The staggering scale of the loss, too.
Exactly. And how a historic, incredibly tight-knit community responds when it is pushed to the absolute brink.
Well, to truly grasp the weight of what happened here, we really need to ground ourselves in the geography and the heritage of this location.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So Saratoga Springs, New York, is not just like another dot on a map for the racing industry. This city has been intimately linked to the sport of horse racing since the 1840s.
The 1840s, I mean, we are talking about nearly 2 centuries of continuous equestrian history just built into the soil of this town.
Yeah, it is widely regarded as the historical heart of American horse racing. And the Saratoga Casino Hotel remains one of the premier racing destinations in the entire country.
Right.
The concentration of owners, trainers, jockeys, and resources there is just immense. So when an incident of this magnitude happens on that specific ground,
It's not just a local fire.
exactly, it is not treated as just a localized structural fire. It sends a shockwave through the very core of the sport's national heritage.
Which makes the timeline of this disaster so critical to untangle. I mean, this happened on a Tuesday, and the fire started around 2:30 a.m.
Right, the middle of the night.
Yeah, and 2:30 in the morning in a typical corporate office building or like a casino floor is the dead of night. It's when the automated systems take over.
Sure.
But the backstretch is different, isn't it?
Very different, because the care of these animals requires an extremely early start.
Yeah.
So the discovery of the fire was not made by, a passing police cruiser on a distant highway or a smoke detector pinging some remote security desk.
Then who found it?
The initial flames were spotted by the actual employees of the tracks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, these were the grooms and workers actively arriving for their early morning duties, people showing up in the pitch dark to feed the horses, muck out the stalls, and just begin the daily training routines.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because here is where the physics of the event kind of collide with human response. And I am really trying to wrap my head around the sheer speed of what happened next.
It was incredibly fast.
Right. We are talking about a fire that moved like a flash flood of heat and smoke. How does a blaze move so rapidly that even people who are already standing right there on site, people actively starting their shifts, are completely helpless to stop it?
Well, the answer lies in the specific, very dangerous architecture of a horse barn. I mean, when we build a modern office building, we build it to compartmentalize fire, right?
Right, with heavy doors and sprinklers.
Exactly. We use concrete, fire-retardant drywall, heavy fire doors to basically starve the flames of oxygen and fuel. Yeah. But a barn is designed to do the exact opposite.
Because barns are designed to breathe.
Precisely the problem in a fire scenario. Airflow is absolutely essential for a horse's respiratory health. So barns feature, high ceilings, open stall grates, and massive doors at either end.
So they're essentially horizontal chimneys.
That's exactly what they are. And if you combine that wind tunnel ventilation with the materials inside, I mean, massive amounts of highly combustible dry hay, wood shavings used for stall bedding.
Kindling, basically.
Yeah, and the pervasive dust that acts as an airborne accelerant. You just don't get a slow, smoldering fire. You get an explosive escalation.
Wow. And that structural reality perfectly mirrors how the survivors actually described it. When you look at the fundraising campaign established right after the event, they used very specific phrasing.
What do they say?
They described the blaze as moving, quote, too fast and too quickly. And that isn't just an emotional description, you know. It's a literal account of the physics at play. There was no time for a measured, step-by-step evacuation protocol because the environment itself was feeding the fire at this uncontrollable rate.
Right, and the official reports really reflect that terrifying speed. That specific barn was housing up to 18 horses.
18.
Yeah. And by the time the workers could raise the alarm and the first responders actually arrived, the fire had already completely consumed the structure.
Oh, my God.
Out of the 18 horses inside, only one managed to escape the inferno, suffering minor injuries.
So 17 horses perished.
17, yeah.
God, when a fire moves that fast, I mean, the window for rescue isn't measured in minutes, it's measured in seconds.
Right. The sheer speed left virtually zero time to pull 17,000-pound animals out of locked stalls.
I can't even imagine.
It's horrific. But when you factor in that speed, the darkness, and the sheer chaos of a collapsing, burning structure, there is a miraculous detail in the official reports that we absolutely have to highlight.
What's...
Authorities confirmed absolutely zero human injuries.
Wait, none?
None at all.
Which is astounding. I mean, put yourself in the shoes of those morning workers. You show up to feed your horses, and suddenly you are facing a literal wall of fire.
Yeah.
The instinct to rush in and save the animals you care for every single day must be just overwhelming. To have zero human casualties means that somehow, amidst all that terror, the people on the ground managed to keep each other out of the deadliest zones.
Yeah, it speaks to massive restraint and a really fast deployment of emergency protocols by the first responders and the track security.
Right.
They stepped into an unmanageable inferno and managed to draw a hard line to protect human life when the structural situation was, already a total loss.
And when a fire moves that fast, you aren't just losing a building, you are losing the living, breathing center of a trainer's entire life.
Absolutely.
A barn is not just a storage facility for equipment. So I want to look closely at the devastating impact this had on the individuals involved, because the human element here is incredibly complex.
Well, the horses in that destroyed barn belonged to two highly respected trainers. Robin Mangiardi lost 11 horses in the fire.
11 horses?
Yeah, and Timothy Benson lost 6.
I think we really need to pause on what a loss like that actually means, because it is very easy to just, read a news ticker, see the numbers 11 and 6, shake your head at the tragedy, and just move on.
Right, they just become numbers.
Exactly. But how does someone even begin to process the dual nature of this crisis? We aren't just talking about the profound emotional loss of beloved animals, which is agonizing given the intense daily bond between a trainer and a horse.
Yeah.
We are talking about the absolute overnight evaporation of a person's livelihood.
What's fascinating here is how the economics of this sport are just punishingly tied to the physical well-being of the animal.
Oh, for sure.
A trainer's entire financial foundation is housed inside those stalls. Think about the capital required to operate at a premier facility like Saratoga.
It's got to be massive.
It is. You have the cost of the horses themselves, the specialized feed, the veterinary bills, the custom harness equipment, the wages for the grooms, and the stall rent.
Right. So the horses are the engine of that entire microeconomy. If the engine is gone, the revenue stream goes to zero instantly.
Yeah, exactly.
But the overhead and the debts, those don't just disappear.
No, they don't.
Oh.
The emotional and economic lives of these trainers are completely intertwined. A trainer doesn't just, clock out at 5 p.m.
Right, it's not a desk job.
It's their daily routine, their business model, their personal passion. It is a 24/7 commitment.
Yeah.
To lose 17 horses between two trainers is a catastrophic financial wipeout, but it is also an identity-altering emotional blow. You are losing your business partners and your family members in the exact same moment.
Which really explains the reaction from the broader community. The Saratoga Harness Horsepersons Association released a statement that framed this perfectly.
What did they say?
They didn't just call it a sad day. They called it, quote, a horseperson's worst nightmare.
A nightmare.
Yeah.
Yeah, that phrase resonates because it highlights a shared, kind of unspoken vulnerability that everyone in the Backstretch lives with every single day.
Exactly.
The organization also called it a sobering day in our industry. because this heartbreak wasn't isolated to just Robin Mangiardi and Timothy Benson.
Right, it hit everyone.
Every single trainer, owner, and groom working at Saratoga knows exactly how much sweat equity it takes to build a stable. And they all know exactly how fragile that existence really is.
And that fragility brings up a terrifying logistical question. If we understand how fast this fire moved, and we know that a barn is essentially a wind tunnel full of kindling, what about the rest of the facility?
That's the scariest part.
Right. Because, as we established, the Backstretch is a village. That burning barn was not just sitting isolated in the middle of a 10-acre field.
No, not at all. It was part of a massive, interconnected network of structures. The Backstretch area of the Saratoga complex typically stables approximately 350 horses.
350 horses. So you have a fire moving too fast and too quickly, just yards away from hundreds of other highly sensitive flight animals.
Yeah.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, looking at how the community actually executed the response. You have track personnel and grooms who have just witnessed their friends' livelihoods go up in flames. They are in complete shock.
Right.
But they can't stop to grieve because the fire is actively threatening the neighboring barns. It's like a small-town bucket brigade.
And the logistics of evacuating a horse in that environment are just incredibly dangerous. You aren't just picking up a laptop and walking out of a burning office.
Yeah.
You are dealing with 1,000-pound prey animals whose primary survival instinct is to flee when they smell smoke.
Or paradoxically, to refuse to leave at all. I've read that horses in a panic will sometimes dig in or even try to run back into their stalls because it's the only safe environment they know.
That is a very real, very dangerous phenomenon in barn fires. The terror the animals experience makes them unpredictable and immensely powerful. So you have emergency responders, security personnel, and track workers blindly haltering panicked horses in the dark, breathing in smoke, trying to lead them out of adjacent barns.
While the heat from the Inferno is radiating right next to them.
Exactly.
It reminds me of a bank run, but with lives at stake. You have seconds to get the most valuable things out, but the things weigh 1,000 pounds and are fighting you out of sheer terror.
Yeah.
The fact that the surrounding workers formed this impromptu, high-stakes bucket brigade to get those neighboring horses out, it's just incredible.
And their success is literally the only reason this deep dive isn't about the loss of 50 or 100 horses.
Wow, that puts it in perspective.
Sam Jarrety, the chief executive officer of the Saratoga Casino Hotel, he specifically highlighted this in the aftermath. He released a statement where he praised the incredibly fast efforts of the first responders, the security teams, and the racing staff.
Right. He noted that their immediate pivot to protect the nearby horses and people was the deciding factor.
His exact words were, "The loss suffered today is heartbreaking for our racing community." But he followed that by stating, "We are deeply grateful to everyone whose swift actions helped prevent an even greater tragedy."
An even greater tragedy.
Yeah. That phrase really underscores the knife's edge the entire facility was walking that night. With 350 horses in the immediate vicinity, a shift in the wind or a 5-minute delay in the evacuation could have resulted in an unprecedented historic catastrophe for the sport.
And the speed of that physical response on the ground was mirrored by the financial and emotional response from the industry. The broader community mobilized almost instantly.
The solidarity of the racing world was on full display here. Within mere hours of the tragedy, an online fundraiser was established to support the affected trainers and their staff.
How much did they raise?
In that incredibly short window, it surpassed $50,000 in donations.
$50,000 before the smoke had even fully cleared. That is unbelievable.
The supporters, fans, and fellow horsemen just rallied behind the devastated community with a speed that matched the urgency of the crisis itself.
Yeah.
It was a clear signal to the trainers that while their immediate livelihoods were gone, the community was not going to let them fall into total ruin.
So as the sun finally comes up, the fire is extinguished, and the neighboring horses are secured. The focus of this village has to turn to the immediate aftermath.
Right.
You have a community that is physically exhausted, in deep mourning, and just desperate for answers.
Well, the immediate logistical fallout was a complete pause on the operation. The facility canceled all racing activities scheduled for Tuesday. Business as usual was just impossible.
Of course.
The Saratoga Casino Hotel also announced plans to hold a memorial service honoring the 17 horses that lost their lives, recognizing that the community really needed a dedicated, shared space to process the grief.
Because you can't just fix the fences and run the next race. But while the community mourns, there is this massive, glaring question hanging over the entire historic facility. How did this happen?
And that remains the most unsettling part of this entire event.
They still don't know.
The cause of the deadly blaze is completely unknown and remains under active investigation by authorities.
Wow.
Was it an electrical fault? Was it an equipment failure? Did a piece of machinery overheat? I mean, until investigators sift through the ashes and determine what sparked the Inferno, it is an open, lingering question.
So what does this all mean for the sport? I mean, how does a facility that has been the crown jewel of American horse racing since the 1840s reconcile this kind of modern tragedy?
It's tough.
It feels like an impossible tension. How do you safeguard a premier, iconic destination moving forward without fundamentally altering the historic character of the Backstretch?
That tension is exactly what industry leaders and legal experts are grappling with right now. Sarah Berger, a city supervisor and an attorney representing the Saratoga Harness Horsepersons Association, spoke directly to this.
What was her take?
She emphasized the absolute necessity of learning from this disaster, regardless of how painful it is to look at. She issued a very clear warning saying, quote, "This tragic loss is a reminder that such events can happen anywhere."
Can happen anywhere. That is a chilling thought when you consider the sheer amount of wealth, focus, and resources a place like Saratoga has at its disposal.
Exactly. She followed that up by saying, "We must determine the cause and do everything possible to ensure a tragedy like this never happens again."
Right.
Her underlying point is vital. If an explosive, unstoppable fire can happen at one of the premier racing destinations in the United States, it exposes a baseline vulnerability in the way these facilities operate.
It really does.
Finding the cause isn't just about closure for the trainers affected on that Tuesday. It is a critical mandate for the future safety of every barn, at every track, across the entire industry.
It really is a mandate. So as we synthesize all of the sources we've unpacked today, the main takeaways paint a pretty stark picture.
They do.
We are looking at the deep, inherent fragility of these historic racing operations. We've seen how the very design of a barn makes it incredibly susceptible to a fire moving with terrifying speed.
And how a trainer's entire life's work, their deep emotional bonds, and their complete financial stability can be erased before sunrise.
Exactly. But alongside that fragility, we absolutely have to acknowledge the rapid, undeniable resilience of the Saratoga racing community.
Oh, without a doubt.
From the track staff risking their own safety in the dark to navigate panicked horses out of neighboring barns, to a broader community raising over $50,000 in a matter of hours. It is a powerful testament to the strength of this Backstretch village.
It is a dual narrative. You have
Yeah.
devastating loss, and you have extraordinary communal strength.
Yeah.
As the investigation continues, we will eventually get answers about the cause, but the legacy of how these people responded is already cemented.
Beautifully said. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, our listener, with a final thought to mull over, building on that stark warning from attorney Sarah Berger that this can happen anywhere.
Yeah.
Consider this. If a devastating, physically unstoppable fire can wipe out a barn at 2:30 in the morning at one of America's premier, most historic, and well-resourced racing destinations, while staff are literally already on site and active.
Right.
Just how vulnerable are the thousands of smaller, quieter, massively under-resourced agricultural and animal facilities across the country right now?
It's a scary thought.
It really makes you rethink the hidden risks operating out there in the dark long after the rest of the world has gone to sleep.
Okay, one question for you. How do you think a devastating bonfire like this could happen at one of America's most famous horse racing venues? And what additional safety measures should be mandatory to protect horses and workers from future tragedies? Don't forget to comment. Thanks.